just one thing that that happened is that when I started the postdoc here in Mexico, I wanted to work on live music, but of course, because of the pandemic, I was like, what should I do? So I started to work on live music videos as a cultural memory. So that's what I'm finishing now. And now I'm like trying to go back to the real live music in some way, and working with venues here in Mexico City. But yeah, of course, we're all dealing in a different way with the pandemic to keep working in some way, to keep busy. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe we can wait. I don't know, maybe 2 minutes and start. I don't know, Fabienne, if you want to share your screen, if you want to try something before starting.
Yeah, no, I'm not going to share screen. I'm just going to talk, and I hope you can accept looking at my face. I'm not I'm not a PowerPoint guy, or so unless I have to.
Right.
So I'm planning to speak slowly and hopefully sort of, having you with me along the way. And
that's perfect.
It's also I would have liked to show some video recordings, but it's not easy on Zoom. So sometimes what I've done is to post a link to the video, and then, but I didn't know anything about the context, about how many people and how it would work. So I thought, okay, better simplify the technical dimension of the event, and so as not to risk anything. So I see Rafael Novak. Hello, Rafael. Very nice to see you. Also, Elina from Finland. If you are in Finland, I can't see your image. That's fine. But hello. I don't know if I know anyone else, but it's nice to see you.
Okay. So maybe we should start now.
Can we wait 2 minutes?
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, of course.
I think I wouldn't be surprised if some people show up 10 minutes into the presentation.
Okay.
I think that's common.
Yes.
Or even later.
Yeah, especially because we don't have a like a system or device to send reminders. Like sometimes when you book an event, like on Eventbrite or something,
yes.
We're not that advanced. So anyway, maybe people will remember.
So I was wondering, Michael, if we should just go ahead and start, so we don't waste time, and then whoever might want to join can join along the way.
Sure. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone to this session of the Seminario. We are here in Mexico, and thank you for being here. Thank you to the CSUN and UNAM for hosting the session. We're here in Mexico, but Fabienne, you're in Denmark. Fabienne, you will be the guest of this session, because we really wanted to talk about your book and to hear more about it. We know that there was a boom of live music in the 2000s, and there was also a boom of research on live music in maybe more in the 2010, a boom in which you, Fabienne, actually played a key role, I think. And this book here, very great book. It has a great value, I think, because it synthesizes much of this research that emerged, but it also offers a more critical approach to live music. Indeed, the book questions many aspects of the recent evolutions of live music, from let's say its massive commercialization to its links to urban development. In other words, the book focuses on an understanding of live music in terms of public values, not only market values or supposedly cultural values. And I think this approach is all the more relevant in the context of the pandemic, in my opinion, as our societies engage in public discussions on what is essential and what is not. And the fact is that live music is more and more defined by its economic weight and less by its cultural or public value. But this economic weight is not enough to consider live music as an essential sector. So, well, I'm not saying that live music is or should be considered as essential, but it's an interesting lens to discuss live music in these weird times. Anyway, as I said, we also have a research program here in Mexico City about nightlife, and part of it is on live music. So I hope you can follow some of our activities through the blog. I will put the link in the chat, and if you want to start, Fabian.
Yes. Thank you very much thank you very much, Michael. Since we are so few at this point, I was wondering if it would be okay with you to have a brief round where everyone says your name and where you're based. We could start with you, Michael, and then Alejandro. And
okay, so as I said, we are here in Mexico City, hosted. The seminar is hosted at UNAM, la Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México. And Alejandro, if you want.
Yeah, well, I'm Alejandro Mercado. I'm a professor at National University of Mexico at this center, CISEN, that is the Center for Research on North America. And I work on creative networks, music and film mostly, both at the macro level and in the urban level.
If some people don't feel comfortable speaking in English, you can speak in Spanish and
yes. Yolanda?
Sure. Hi, I'm Yolanda. I'm in Mexico City, and I research the effective bombs that are created on the night, and I've researched the indie music circuit in the night in Mexico City in the night.
Yeah. Sandra?
Hello, I'm in Mexico City too. My research is about cultural economy in Latin America, and my work is in cultural management.
Interesting. Yeah. Elizabeth?
Yes, I'm Elizabeth Gutierrez. I work at CISAN in Mexico City, and I'm beginning a research with mariachi music as a cultural identity in both countries, Mexico and the United States.
Rafael?
Hello, everyone. I'm Rafael Novak. I'm a cultural sociologist. This academic year, I was based at Paris Free Sorbonne Nouvelle in France. And over the summer, I will be moving over to York in the UK and starting as a lecturer in sociology.
Great. Niklas Biomeke? Sorry if I don't pronounce it correctly.
It's perfectly fine. Hello, everyone. It's a German last name. Sorry for that. I'm Niklas Blumeke. I'm a PhD student at the University of Paderborn. I just started my PhD program there and was part of a research group that did like a full census of live venues and clubs in Germany last year. And yeah, very interested and a fanboy, I have to confess. Very happy to be here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And also interesting because I know some of your colleagues in Paderborn. Jose Luis Paredes.
Hi, I am Jose Luis Paredes Pacho. I am the director of the Museo Universitario del Chopo from the National Autonomous University as well. there we develop a lot of research depending on the exhibition or the project in literature, art, and live arts. And personally, my research now is more about the on-the-ground scene, cultural scene of Mexico City in the 80s and 90s through the pages of two underground magazines that were important in those years. That's it.
Thank you. Elena?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my mobile phone, but so that's why I need to sort of trying to do something with the screen. But so I'm Elina Hyttönen, and I'm from the University of Eastern Finland. As trained as an ethnomusicologist, and I've done some work before about jazz musicians and their working environment. So that's where my interest into this topic comes from. So,
Thank you. Graciela?
Hello, I work at Sesion, and nowadays I'm the director of Sesion, and my research is on Canadian film and literature.
Thank you.
So
Susanna?
my interest is on cultural studies.
Yeah. Thank you. Susanna, I'm moving a bit quickly so as not to lose too much time. Thank you very much. Susanna? Could you turn on the microphone, please? Sorry, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, you're still mute.
No, we can't hear you. Let's try. If you can try to make it work, we will move on now to Diana. And then hopefully we can get back to
Hi, good morning. I'm a student for a Master of Communications in UNAM. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Alfredo? Francisco? Susanna, are you with us now? Can you?
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm working with Alejandro Mercado. My research is focused on fairs and festivals, particularly on sector design.
Thank you. So I hope that everyone was introduced, and if not, I apologize. In the interest of time, I would like to start the presentation now, and I wanted to say that this I mean, I've done a few presentations on the book, and the most recent one was a book launch in which I had the misjudgment of inviting some of the people I criticized in the book, and it didn't turn out too well. It was a somewhat traumatic experience, but I thought that this was it was I mean, that's part of the book. The book is in some respects critical, and I would like to also discuss or to acknowledge some sort of the position that I take, and for today's presentation, I think also the book launch was more intense because I was presenting the whole book, and it was rather compressed, and it has been a very intense research experience, and also an ambitious project. For this, for the presentation today, I'm trying to be somewhat calmer and presenting more like one perspective. I didn't know much about. I don't know much about your research sort of community in Mexico. From the name Creative and Culture Industries Seminar, I decided to emphasize that dimension this concept of institutionalization, and in dialogue with Michael Spaniel, we decided to use chapter 4 as a shared reading for this event. The other dimension, or perhaps even the main dimension of the chapter, is an urban sociology. So it's kind of a sociology and cultural history of the city, and so it is in that context that I discuss at the club. But I'm trying to emphasize today the organizational dimensions, including the concept of institutions. I should like to say that I'm coming to the cultural industries from the side because I approach them sociologically, as a sociologist and as a cultural historian, and one of the main objectives of the book is to examine the cultural impacts of organizational change in the music field. Before I go on, I would like to say that this is only, of course, I mean, emphasizing throughout this presentation, my decision to emphasize the organizational dimension is a choice. It doesn't mean that there are not other aspects, and some aspects are more historical, some are more about urban studies. So just to make sure that I'm emphasizing this perspective, and so if you're wondering why I'm talking so much about organizational theory, this is a conscious choice, and I hope it was the right choice for the occasion, and also that it will bring clarity to some of the things I've written. Understanding how organizational change is impacting on the music field, and how music has become part of modern bureaucracy, changing divisions between work and leisure, and the live music industry, which has developed since the 80s, how it has evolved as an extension of the wider media and culture industries. David Hesmondolch, who by the way has been very much involved in evaluating sort of my book, and is really an inspirational, a huge inspiration for me. He has written, say, in the 4th edition of his book, The Culture Industries, which I can't recommend enough, how media and culture industries have developed since the 1980s through growing markets resulting from growing consumer demand, changes in demographics and lifestyle, and through international corporatization, frequent mergers and acquisitions, and the expanded advertising economy. The live music industry has evolved in the slipstream of these developments, first by defining itself as an industry, and then becoming an object of investment and appealing to the advertising industry and to political agendas of economic growth. The commercial exploitation of live music has gone so far that even such small institutions as the Club for Popular Music Performance has been transformed into a platform of the corporate concert industry. The chapter you have read documents how New York's rock club field is now generally divided between the two major live music corporations of the world, especially dominating in North America and Europe. In light of this development, one can understand why the industry's term for mass market music performance, the term live music, is becoming dominant. My book attempts to analyze this development without limiting the discussion to the industry discourse that separates organized life from cultural life. The book mainly does this historically by showing how the norms of the field have changed in the process of its industrialization. It also documents negative consequences of this process that are being ignored by the uncritical discourse on live music and its underlying consumer culture norms. The book argues that the enthusiasm for live music's economic value has led to this ignorance and to a lack of historically grounded thinking about the topic. For this reason, the book begins with a critical analysis of the construction of live music as an object of study and goes on to reconstruct it, arguing that live music is a particular instance of the broader phenomenon of music performance, and that the transformation of performance into live music results from developments in media and commerce. A common charge against critical research on commodification and corporatization is that it is nostalgic or politically biased. My approach seeks to challenge the skepticism and encourage us all to think more deeply about it. I seek to understand different norms in the field. The book includes case studies and field research in different cities, in different countries, and in each case, I explore different norms, different attitudes, different interpretations of the situation. So not only one, and I try to be critical of all these narratives, not only the ones that I don't have a personal sympathy for. But first and foremost, and perhaps I have not been clear about this before, first and foremost, I argue that changes in dominant norms and conditions are real and can be observed regardless of one's political orientation. I firmly believe that the conditions of music production and of cultural life in cities have changed. Then, of course, there are different opinions about it. Some are more positive, some are more skeptical, but the conditions have changed, and that is I think this analytical perspective is the most important to me. And I hope that the interpretation that I offer and the criticism that I offer evolves from the analysis. And this is in this respect that I hope that I'm somewhat different from Adorno, for instance, or others who are a little bit quick to condemn and writing from their let's say ideological bias from the outset, and not trying to understand, also the sort of the diversity of perspectives in the field. I hope that I'm doing that. So I think one of the things that have happened sort of in general, in terms of the changing conditions, is that the exchange value of music and of cultural life more generally has become more dominant over the use value. So in Marxist terms, I mean, live music is in the performance field. It is definitely a result of the exchange value of performance becoming more dominant, and this is a condition, in my view, in my analysis, and I think it's related to how the conditions of urban life how they have evolved. In my experience, moreover, critical analysis of consumer culture is unsettling for those steeped in the angelic view of live music. If live music is defined purely in terms of magical, enjoyable, and authentic experiences, it can be hard to think critically about live music's relation to capitalism and consumption. My final introductory remark concerns the pandemic, and I already heard from Michael and from Alejandro and other fine colleagues in Mexico that you're conducting research in this area, and I haven't done as much as you have, but I want to acknowledge, of course, that the music performance field has been shut down for about 18 months, and that many organizations are struggling. But the field, this organization field, is surviving and beginning to resume activity, first in clubs and then festivals with the bigger events. And the pandemic has illustrated the particular historical situation, I think, with the cultural industries. There have been epidemics and major societal crises in the past, which have led to a ban on public gatherings, but never before have the cultural industries had such influence in defining responses to the crisis and speaking for publics. Speaking for cities, they have never been larger and more influential in society. For this reason, I think this is another reason to be critical. So let me now begin the main part of my presentation, which is organized into two parts. The first part introduces institutional theory. The second part analyzes the transformation of the rock club in New York City. I hope you can hear me, that the sound is okay. I'm not speaking too fast. Good, thank you.
Good.
The topic of commercial institutionalization of the rock club, and as part of the book, This is the topic of chapter 4, and it played a key role in developing the theory. I did fieldwork in Berlin actually for a few years on clubs in Berlin that led to nothing. I mean, literally nothing. I didn't have long-term research sort of field trips to Berlin, but I went to Berlin several times and conducted several interviews in Berlin. It led to nothing. But when I arrived in New York City in 2010, my understanding of the structural change of music performance field in capitalism became clear in a very short time. It seemed that the structures of the field were more strongly, the contrasts were more strongly articulated in New York City. Also, the Manhattan is a very compressed space. So it was, this chapter was it's a very long chapter also, and so even if I'm summarizing some parts and commenting on them, it might feel that I mean, just keep in mind that it's a long chapter. I began to interpret another confession. I began to interpret the rock club as an institution out of an interest in understanding the phenomenon in more general term, but it was for a long time it was an intuitive understanding. To my knowledge, there's no tradition in popular music studies or in music sociology for thinking about organizations and institutions, and certainly not with sort of in relation to festivals and clubs. And I don't claim it's not, for me, it's not important about who invented what, but and about criticizing someone, but for a long time this was an intuitive understanding that when I suddenly sort of discovered the long history of institutional theory and sociology, many things clicked, and it was easy to adapt this framework. The concept of institution provides a general perspective on different types of clubs as models that change over time. And this makes it possible to analyze changes in many clubs and to understand their function within the field of production. So understanding more general patterns, but also understanding the function within a field. The book interprets the club as the dominant institution of pop music performance in everyday urban life, and the festival as the dominant institution of the summer season. I hope you'll read more of the book to explore the framework and also the longer and broader 300-year history of the field. Roberta Sassatelli, an Italian sociologist, writes insightfully about the commercial institutionalization of the fitness club, of the fitness gym. She describes how sociologists of leisure have observed a development in modern societies from leisure-based in civic and voluntary organizations to leisure-based in commercial organizations. Sassatelli shows how fitness culture changed in the process of its commercial institutionalization, and how this is involved in focusing on consumer needs and the development of a more glamorous image of fitness culture in the fitness gym. And to me, the obvious parallel in live music or music performance is Coachella, for instance. Like from Glastonbury, the first Glastonbury to Coachella, there's an obvious change in image and this more glamorous image and the sort of the event spectacle and everything. The concept of commercial institutionalization can be distinguished from terms such as commercialization, commodification, and industrialization by its focus on institutions, of course, and the role of organizational structures in transforming cultural life. The wider social theory perspective brought up by the concept of institutions involves the history of thinking about organizations in sociology. The dominant perspective in the sociology of arts and popular culture in the USA, the production of culture perspective, represents a form of institutional theory, but it can be developed by complementing the study of institutional frameworks, which is sort of the focus by studying the outlook and functions of particular organizational level institutions, such as the fitness gym, the club, the festival, the theater, and the museum, for instance, but also the historical transformations. The production of culture perspective can also be complemented by a more general sociology of organizations, so as not to limit the study of organizational structures to individual sort of professional fields. The concept of institutions is central to sociologists' interest in the structure of social life and the evolution of distinct domains in society. How culture, for instance, has become defined as a domain and not as something that is integrated with work. Theories of institutions share an interest in overcoming atomistic accounts that describe individual situations with little attention to general social dynamics and societal context. A core analytical entity in classic organizational sociology is the individual organization, and there was this tradition for studying organizations in local context, also the internal dynamics of the organization. By contrast, the new institutionalism of the 1970s, which has been very influential, still influential, has emphasized how organizations are shaped by the environment of other organizations, and primarily defines an institution as an organizational field. So an institution can be a type of organization, roughly speaking, but it can also be an organizational field. And this role of the field in shaping organizations and how flow of resources are moving through individual organizations is important. And this is, with the pandemic, I think relevant because the entire field of music performance, but also of festivals, has been shut down. It's not only one organization, for instance, or a few, but what happens when the entire field is shut down? A most influential figure in thinking about organizational structures is Max Weber, for whom bureaucracy was a defining aspect of modern society. Weber argued that bureaucracy emerged from market competition, state governments and bourgeois demands, and replaced earlier forms of domination that were less, quote-unquote, rational, in that they were not governed by the same precise rules of coercion, forms of permanent administrative office regulation, and logics of means and calculus and matter-of-factness. Much institutional theory has been concerned with the large engines of society, with government and industry. This explains the emphasis on bureaucratic processes and formal regulation, which have been less central to leisure institutions that have historically been small and local and constituted by their difference from the functional spheres of society, by, quote unquote, being non-essential institutions. Scholarship on music performance can learn from this. The literature is somewhat atomistic in that examples are generally analyzed with little attention to the institutional dimension. Performance culture is typically studied in terms of individual events and music genres. Concert halls, for instance, are studied as venues, but concert halls also have an organizational dimension that makes them institutions. They're not just a space, a geographic space or an architectural space. They're also sociologically institutions. I conceive of a performance institution as a form of organized performance culture structured by regular production and consumption in a particular type of architectural space. Each performance institution, such as the club and the festival, can be described in general terms, but typically exist in different forms that can be described as models. The DIY rock club is one model, the corporate rock club is another model. The hippie festival is one, the large EDM pop festival is another. Like other cultural institutions, performance institutions become socially meaningful and symbolically important in cultural life through the frequent repetition and experience of the culture's rituals and values. A performance institution articulates a stable aesthetic and social arrangement in a performance space through the ordering of ritual, mythology, and programming. Performance institutions are structured by seasonal dynamics and the norms of a culture, including genre. They complement each other and compete within the leisure stations and evolving music markets, and they're contingent to changes in their respective organizational fields and urban environments. So the flow of resources, for instance, is also highly regulated by the city, not just the organizational field. Market competition drives the structuration, to use Giddens' term, the structuration of the organizational field, which can lead to a situation in which a few commercial models replace a more diverse range of older models. This is something that can be observed in many fields throughout history, and it has happened now in live music, or if you prefer the term music performance. A diverse range of models have been replaced by a smaller number of commercial models. Such a situation is characterized by a high level of cultural homogeneity and bureaucracy. The concept of institutions can be further delineated along 4 dimensions. The first is symbolic. A performance institution is governed by its own symbolic order, such as the ritual and mythology of the festival. It also interprets the wider symbolic order of the genre and cultural sphere to which it belongs. It provides a space in which artists and audiences reproduce and potentially transform a symbolic order through their performative engagement with materials, symbols, and cognitive schemes. My book explores how norms and values govern practices, drawing from symbolic approaches to festive events, anthropology and sociology, and from new institutionalism. The symbolic, in sociology, the symbolic dimension informs interpretations of the functions and mythologies of clubs and festivals and music culture. This is why I think clubs and festivals are so important for music historians and for music studies in general, including music sociology, because they are central to understanding the social life of the music and how music becomes important in social life. These are central institutions of the culture. The second dimension is temporal. Institutions result from the process of institutionalization that fixes and institutes a social arrangement and infuses it with meaning. The arrangement attains a certain state and property of stability and relative permanence that makes it less vulnerable to intervention. And this is actually what we're going to see in the discussion of the New York field, because the DIY scene was not very institutionalized and it was very vulnerable to intervention. Organized life has a constant and repetitive character. Its institutions are defined by taken for granted practices and self-sustaining structures. My book explores the temporal dimension in historical analysis of the evolution of the club and the festival, including their trajectories from urban scenes into corporate structures. The third dimension is organizational, the organizational dimension. Each articulation of a performance institution involves the formal ownership and management of a promoter. The promoter is a key actor in the social arrangement of the individual club or festival. It serves functions as a host by coordinating, programming, and promoting events, maintaining facilities, and selling drinks. The promoter owns the performance space and further regulates this space socially through pricing, admission rules, opening hours, and so on and so forth. Independent promoters have occasionally been endowed with the charismatic role of a visionary and champion of the culture, embodied in the personality of the manager. Corporations, by contrast, operate through the more impersonal and abstract logic of the brand. The larger the market, the greater the potential for centralized and bureaucratic ownership. The impersonal social relations created by large corporations and markets can contradict and have alienating impacts on the desire for and production of intimacy and performance. The new institutionalism in organizational sociology of the 70s argued that organizational life had become increasingly corporate and that organizational fields had become more centralized and were now playing a larger role in structuring organized life. Their macro-level perspective on national organizational fields, not just local organizations, but national fields, has since become common. Walter Powell and Paul DiMaggio's pioneering theory of processes in which organizations become more similar, their theory of institutional isomorphism, helps explain why the corporatization of music performance has not just expanded the field, but also transformed it. There are certain things that no longer exist. Certain values that have been repressed or died. Key drivers of isomorphism are market growth, professionalization of production, the rise of trade associations, and monopolistic conditions in which many organizations depend on the same vital resources provided by a few corporations. This is exactly a portrait of the live music sector or the live music field. Finally, the societal dimension. The more an area of social life is institutionalized, the more bureaucratic and integrated with the engines of society it becomes. In this Weberian perspective, the commercial institutionalization of music performance makes music culture more bureaucratic and integrated with capitalism. Corporations are increasingly structuring the forms of music that are produced, the environments of experience, and the spaces of communication. My book explores how popular music institutions have adapted to the bureaucratic environment of the city and the culture industries. It highlights how corporations have retooled these institutions. So I'm now getting to the section about the analytical section, the case study of the field in New York. A key objective of the book is the disciplinary integration of music performance into the social study of music, and particularly music sociology. The chapter you have read is therefore framed as a contribution to the social study of music in cities. The general question is this: what can be learned about music and social life in cities from studying commercial institutions such as the rock club? The chapter argument situates the rock club in the process of urban capitalism known as gentrification. Gentrification privileges affluent populations and for-profit cultural organizations. Institutions such as the rock club, fitness gym, art museum, and so on have evolved into corporate forms and been integrated into a consumer culture value system. I argue that the small informal rock club in bohemian neighborhood scenes of the Lower East Side in the 70s and 80s shaped the mythology of the club, but that the contemporary landscape is dominated by another model, the larger commercial concert club. The latter is governed by a new institutional arrangement of the corporate industry, larger markets, and the aesthetics and values of a new condition of urban life. The analysis is organized into sections on different models of the rock club that are analyzed within the rock field's transformation within the wider neighborhood transformations. So you might see that these different models of the rock club embody or crystallize interests and values that are produced by a larger process of urban social change. The first section examines the DIY concept of clubs in the Brooklyn warehouse scene of the 2000s. It shows how the culture's conception of performance institutions reflects a resistance to commercial and formal institutionalization and a struggle for survival in the face of gentrification. Promoter Todd Patrick was a champion of the DIY culture of adventurous shows in quote-unquote found spaces. I adopted this term from Marcel, what was his name? Duchamp. So I call it found spaces. And his network of music promoters was fed by the social ecology, the neighborhood ecology created by a visual arts scene in Williamsburg, Brooklyn. Patrick said, "I don't think you need a rock club." A very conscious gesture. He didn't want the institution. Instead, used the term show space. As he got older and exhausted by managing unauthorized venues, which was a history of having the police coming and closing his shows, you know, unpleasant experiences and all the trouble that comes with it. He adopted a discourse of institutionalization. He sought to institutionalize his venue, Market Hotel, decided to invest in this venue in the long term. And he institutionalized it into his idea was to institutionalize it into the New York art world. This is his term. He still didn't want to become part of the concert industry. The Brooklyn DIY case study shows the power of institutions, even in a part of the field that is not very institutionalized. The DIY scene consciously defined itself in opposition to the commercially institutionalized parts of the field. The story of this scene also shows what kind of culture is possible in such context, and how vulnerable it is to urban capitalism, how vulnerable, in other words, it is to interventions from large-scale structural change. The following section on the history of the rock field going back to the Lower East Side, but also the longer history longer social history of the Lower East Side, and not only the sort of the rock field's history, is mostly relevant for understanding the rock club in urban cultural history, and how the club has been defined in this exotic place in the context of urban poverty, and how urban history thus provides these insight into ethical issues that are generally left out of writing about clubs and scenes. The section on the commercial concert club is central to the analysis of commercial institutionalization. It shows the club's evolution into the dominant structures of the contemporary gentrified city. Gentrification, and this is not, just to make sure, I mean, this is not necessarily negative. Of course, most of the people that I interviewed in these clubs, in these what I call the commercial sort of concert club, they were very pleased with what they experienced. And they didn't, this is also, I hope, appears from the chapter, they didn't want to go to DIY clubs and stay in more remote places of the city and stay up until 4 a.m. They enjoyed the perfection, and they enjoyed that, they appreciated that the clubs were presenting music to their taste. Gentrification kicked in the East Village in the 80s with a dramatic rise in real estate prices and a growing white population attracted to cheap space in a centrally located neighborhood and to its art scenes and nightlife. During the 70s and 80s, a common type of club was the small informal club that also served as a neighborhood bar. Nightlife bars with music programming continue to exist, but the changing neighborhood conditions explain why another model became more dominant, namely the somewhat larger and more conformist concert club with an institutional basis in the concert industry. Gentrification explains the rise of this model and its focus on the consumption of concerts by artists with a presence in mainstream media. It also explains how the model evolved from an organizational culture in the music field that shares the norms of professionalism and perfection in wider labor markets in Manhattan's and Brooklyn's growing creative industries. The development of the rock club into a more mainstream commercial institution further involved a more capitalist organization with investments in real estate and in the development and exploitation of artist talent. The growth of this new rock concert industry in the 90s is not only explained by gentrification, however, but also by the national development of the indie rock music business, which eventually became so broad that its boundaries with more mainstream forms of pop and rock music became fluid, more fluid, very fluid. Let's take a closer look here at the end at Michael Swear, an important figure who I don't think anyone has written about, and I only became aware of his significance late into the process of my research on this field. But his story illustrates, he's both very influential, but also his story also illustrates these broader and very complex transformations in the city and the field. He's one of the central engineers of the commercial indie rock club. Michael Swear has long lived this private backstage life, so there's little information about him, but he is this central figure. In contrast with Todd Patrick, which I talked about before, sort of Patrick had this social approach to architecture. He was thinking about, performance architecture as the space of a social ritual and a social experience. Swear is more focused on this more specific interpretation of space as a place for a concert experience. So the perfection of acoustics, for instance, and sightlines are major priorities in Swear's development of architectural spaces of performance. Patrick has celebrated the tribal energies of found spaces in the urban wilderness, while Swear concentrates on the ideal of the perfected club in gentrifying areas, an ideal structured by, quote unquote, the rationality of the professional concert commodity. From this perspective, it makes sense for Swear to make long-term investments in the state-of-the-art amplification, air conditioning, micro-perfection of architecture, and so on. Swear is also attached to ideas of historical authenticity, like Todd Patrick, but he explores the more general mythology of, quote unquote, old New York, as opposed to the subcultural mythology of Lower East Side. So both have this investment or this passion, attachment, if you will, to the history of the city, but one is attached to the subcultural history of the city, the other not so much. This is sort of relevant to the symbolic level of analysis of the institution. Swear's clubs, and I think you could say that the same of, this is also, again, sort of more, this is illustrative of the general changes in the conditions of life in the city, because the same would apply, I think, in many cases to how residents in Manhattan and in New York would describe their place in the city. They would increasingly describe it in more general terms and not in subcultural terms. Swear's clubs, he has a couple, and he began with one in the early 90s and then expanded in the later 90s. And they all conform to the values of the gentrifying city with a legal status. This is, again, comparison with the Brooklyn DIY scene. Conform to the gentrifying city with a legal status, professional rationality, and a product that appeals to the lifestyles of the new neighborhood populations. Their outlook and functions have much in common with many for-profit cultural organizations in the city. The club's music programming provide entertaining and enjoyable experiences every night for casual and semi-specialized audiences in a market larger than just a single specialized audience or a subculture. There are many tourists, and there's a growing number of audiences from further into Brooklyn, from the suburbs, if you will, also New Jersey. The architectural design is optimized to be comfortable and efficient for the specific purpose of consuming concerts. The interior design is rather neutral and nondescript. There's no graffiti on the walls, for instance. The schedule of performances is punctual and regularized, usually ending before midnight. The generic theater design and perfected interiors are in themselves disciplining. They do not encourage transgressive behaviors or excess. These venues are nonetheless distinct from the posh spaces of more gentrified areas and from mass culture. So it would be easy to say, the story of gentrification in cultural life is that it becomes more like, gentrification is this one sort of entity or one thing. But actually, I think that there's a lot of nuance and there are differentiations in the gentrified city. It's not just, a gray matter, sort of a cultural gray out. And I think that one of the reasons audiences are going to these clubs is precisely because they're seeking authenticity and emotional experiences that they don't find elsewhere in the city. Going to an indie rock performance in a club is a specialized nighttime activity in a space secluded from nearby shopping environments. And in this sense, clubs are not ordinary spaces of everyday life. They create conditions for experiencing more inner values through the hour-long artistic ritual in close proximity to the performer and the indie aesthetics of originality and inner sophistication. Michael Swear enjoyed critical success and developed his business on a larger scale by forming partnerships, which led to the opening of more clubs and the expansion into large concert halls and arenas in the corporate domain of the concert industry. So this is how the structure of the field works, with audience capacities. Once a venue has a larger capacity, larger than, let's say, 2,000, 3,000, it becomes it enters the domain dominated by the industry and especially the corporate industry. So Swear started, his first concert club was this Mercury Lounge in the East Village. It had a capacity for 200 people. By the late 2000s or around the late 2000s, let's say like 15 years later, he worked in a company that was presenting concert in Madison Square Garden. My analysis suggests that Swear eventually felt compromised by the corporate development. And so I wanted to say just, when one first hears about this story of a guy that started, having a rock bar in East Village in the 80s, and then a small concert club in the 90s, and developed from there, and then he became part of this organization that is presenting show in Madison Square Garden and also Radio City Music Hall. To many of say, oh wow, this is a story of success. He won the city, and this was also something I witnessed firsthand when the president of Live Nation was at a conference. It was a music business conference I attended in New York, and he said, he was asked at the end of an interview, he said, "What is your biggest regret?" And he said, "I'm sorry that we lost the city." This was in 2013, and of course, 5 years later, all the clubs are owned by either Live Nation or AEG, because of the international development of these corporations, and so for Swear, it was not actually. We have to look a little bit closer. It was not just a story of success. My analysis suggests that he felt compromised by the corporatization and wanted to become an independent club promoter again, which is what he did until he realized that it wasn't possible because the corporations were dominating the field and he had to cooperate with them. So he then became part of the corporation of the AEG. In conclusion, the chapter conclusion develops the interpretation further based on the analysis. So it's actually an expansion of the argument. It reflects on the wider perspective of how gentrification have changed the conditions of music and social life. This is the idea of that we can learn about the conditions of human life in the city, in the metropolis, from studying the institutions of music, performance institutions. The city has a larger market of more professional pop music culture with a higher level of perfection and control. All this is appreciated by the contemporary audiences in these clubs, but it has also lost the neighborhood ecosystem with artists and audiences living in the same area, and with synergies between art scenes and between arts and urban social life. Also, the condition of human life has become more constrained. The emotional constraint can be observed in the clubs from a historical understanding by comparing with the past situations in the past. One might also argue that the informal organizational culture of the past decades also made it easier for local talent to develop. So what kind of conditions for artists exist when corporations or when the industry is dominating so much? The chapter conclusion primarily discusses perspective for urban culture life and the possibility of a public culture in which the arts integrate with ethical and social values of human life. But I would like to ask you if you think such concerns are relevant to thinking about the creative and cultural industry, which is your sort of the theme of your series. The common logic in industry discourse is to think about smaller venues and artists as a talent pool for the industry. But does artistic growth not require a vibrant social environment that is not institutionalized or industrialized? Can informal scenes survive if they are defined as a stepping stone to the industry and thus incorporated into the industry sphere? What happens if a city only has a culture industry and not cultural scenes that are not defined as industry? So the logic of capitalism, this is the main point here, my main question. The logic of capitalism is market growth by peaceful means. This would explain why the culture industry domain continues to expand. But what are the consequences of unlimited expansion, and how does this relate to your research? Is this something you think about? Are we all analyzing the unlimited expansion of capitalism, or what? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fabian. That was. I mean, of course, for us, we read your chapter in our doctoral seminar, so we all prepared to discuss all these things, all these themes. But I would like to start maybe with a very general remark and see if there are other questions related to it. Because it's a cultural and creative seminar, of course, we're very concerned about the discourse on creative cities. And maybe one thing that remains not that clear for me is how much this change, this evolution that you describe, is pushed by local authorities. Because, of course, there are like tendencies and trends within the market, within the housing market, but I was wondering about this, and I don't know if someone wants to ask a question. Maybe you can take different questions. Of course, you can also ask your questions in the chat, and we'll read them, and you can also just raise your hand, and these are the different ways of asking questions to Fabian.
Thank you, and thank you for your question. I think that the creative city concept is generally used by city governments as a development strategy. This is illustrated by research on the European Capital of Culture, for instance, where there's a great deal of research on how the European Capital of Culture program was transformed from a celebration of, let's say, great the popular understanding of cultural metropolis, so like Athens, London, Paris, to becoming a development program for urban regeneration. Glasgow, I think, was the first city that adopted this approach to the European Capital of Culture. So I think that in general the creative city concept is used as a development tool for in cities that are not the dominant cultural centers, and then then many sort of cultural centers, sort of capital cities, in particular, including London, have since adopted this in some form or another. But Rotterdam, for instance, in Holland is Glasgow, examples of cities. So in New York, it is not. I mean, the city has done little to help its cultural communities survive. I mean, there were when these scenes die, the city is not doing anything to, the government is not doing anything to help them survive, and yeah. It's a different economy. There's not a great infusion. There's not also the city government is not, you know, strongly promoting this creative city discourse. Yeah.
I mean, compared with cities like Austin or Nashville.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
So there is nothing in common with these cities.
I think that over time.
Okay.
Yeah, I think over time they have adopted. They become aware. I mean, this is also how the you can think of the city governments, city governance as an organizational field, because the people working for civic governments are also connected and participate in networks, and they inspire each other and share information. So they become more similar,
okay,
if you will. It's in that sense, this is the isomorphism of the city governance field. But so over time, I see, I've observed, you know, a tendency in New York to, in different respects, in different areas, something that looks like it's inspired by this creative city concept. But I don't think New York necessarily needs to make a statement that it's a creative city. It is generally recognized. They have you can say that they're proud, or you can say they have a big ego, but I think it's they don't have, they're not in the same position as some smaller cities.
Okay. Thank you. Alejandro, you had a question, and maybe I can read then the questions in the chat, and also if someone else has a question, please go ahead.
Okay, well, try a little bit to discuss about the questions that Fabian asked us to answer or to think about it. And I mean, I do see how the institutional model of the rock venue that you described is related also to a type of band and to a certain point in their careers. I mean, and of course that excludes new talent and leaves out institutional ways to give a space for new bands. So the thing is that new bands have to find another ways or another trajectories or another spaces.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is when this model dominates a city, right? I mean, that's the question of, does that cancel the possibility or the opportunity to develop new scenes and new talent, and to find places to look for stages to present their new music. So, I mean, what I think is that, or my approach to this is that if you look at the metropolitan area, I'm thinking just in an urban scale, but can we also think about a national scale, different cities moving in different times? But just thinking in one city at the metropolitan level, I think many institutional models of venues exist or coexist, and they are not necessarily fixed in space, so they can move around. And I think the periphery of the cities have played an important role in creating these new paths for new talent and being the, you know, where these new scenes can flourish. So I don't know what you think about this. I mean, in the case of Mexico City, the study that I mentioned with you at the beginning, that I will send you, I found this incredible diversity of venues coexisting at the same time, and even with, I don't know, many types of bands with different sizes playing in different parts of the city. So I just, you know, want to mention this.
Very, very good, thank you. Well, I do think that of course when I mean in the course of this analysis, I try to generalize some of the insight and say what is the general picture? How, to what extent have the conditions changed? And I say that there, for instance, I make this. I say that I don't think that there are any scenes anymore in New York, in Manhattan and Brooklyn. And I think that this narrative of scenes is being used very. I wouldn't say not uncritically, but there's a certain habit of using the concept of scene very flexibly, and the scene has a flexible history. If you look at consider the book that was edited by Andy Bennett and Richard Peterson, they describe these different meanings of the term, but. I argue in the book that, and I will still maintain that the conditions have changed to an extent that it's possible to see a structural change, and that certain types of venues have certain type of institutions have declined. Gone. I mean, there might be small elements of it left, but very little. And this became clearer over the past decade to me. This is based on long-term research. I think the situation is different in other cities. I think that New York is not very forgiving because the real estate prices are very high, and so in that sense, it's a city that shows an extreme situation, and I think what you said, the situation you describe with many different types of venues, I think it clearly to me is a situation that is not corporatized. This is not something that has developed into a highly organized field that is then commercially institutionalized and developed into forms of corporate ownership. Because in that case, I think it's unlikely to have a wide diversity of a diverse range of spaces. This would be sort of my argument following Paul and Gimaggio that a high level of corporatization and commercial institutionalization results in the shift from a diverse range of models to a few commercial ones.
Thank you. Maybe another question from people here with us, and then I read the questions in the chat. Someone? Okay, so maybe later. So we have a question. Are there substantial changes after COVID-19 in the interaction between the musician and the audience? And the same person also asks, will new cultural spaces be created in the streets to reactivate cultural events?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's hard for me. I wish I could answer that question. I think it's too early to say. I think that what I have observed is sort of there was this spontaneous reaction. I hesitate to call it naive, but a spontaneous reaction among some observers, scholars, journalists, that, wow, look at people they're singing on balconies. Look at people creating concert performances in backyards, as if the world had completely changed and that we were entering a new era. Whereas in fact, I think the pandemic would have to be much longer and actually also more serious. I know in some places it's been very serious, so it's really, but it had to be longer in order for the organizational field to collapse and for new structures to emerge. So while we can observe and cheer at all this spontaneous music making, the industry is sitting, waiting at the keyboard or waiting in the offices, eager to get back. And this is happening now. So I think that the world got and people interested in music and performance and events got a small taste, a small exposure to another kind of culture, another way of engaging with performance. But I don't think that the world fully understood or came to a point, didn't come to a sort of realization that maybe we could actually go in a very different direction.
There's also another question that is actually related to that from Diana. After so much time living in the pandemic, we start to hear about concerts by streaming. The groups and artists are selling the entrance with moderate success. What do you think about this?
Sorry, can you say that again?
It's in the chat, actually, if you want to see it.
Yeah.
After so much time living in the pandemic, we start to hear about concerts live streamed, I guess that's the meaning. And so, but the groups and artists are selling the entrance, the ticket, with moderate success.
Yeah.
So what do you think about this?
Yeah, so this is a few months into the pandemic. There were entrepreneurs who were quick to start thinking about how they could commercialize live streaming of performance. Because there was this explosion of live streams in the first month, and there's been some commercial development of this, and a platform has been developed, and there are trade magazines who are supporting it, the commercialization of turning these online performances into commodities that where you buy tickets and also make donations. I think that it will become a supplement to a higher degree than before to the in-person experience. I don't see it taking over. I think that the value of the in-person experience is way too high. But for specific artists, if let's say your favorite artist in Buenos Aires is doing a tango performance tonight, and there's no way you can go there, but you would definitely like to watch it on your computer. I mean, this will happen, but you will. I think most people will still, by far, enjoy going to the performances in person. As to the commercialization, I think that it's too early to say. I think that there are different trends also on YouTube. We can learn from the experience of YouTube. I mean, how YouTube has been commercialized, because a lot of the content, most of the content is free, but YouTubers become these personalities that then are sponsored and are making profit from how many views they have. So that kind of economy, I can imagine, will also develop for live music. So based on personalities and views, popularity supported by algorithmic structures.
I have another question, actually, that is related to creativity, and it is kind of related to live streaming, but also to what Alejandro said about the different models of venues, of spaces where bands perform, and as they rise as talents, how do they adapt, and they are in need of different spaces to grow their audiences. I think you know this book from David Byrne, How Music Works.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember, it's a very important book, I think, for many people. And the first chapter is about performance spaces. He says that most of the specificity of music creation is related to the space of performance. So he talks about different kinds of traditional music, but he also talks about the importance of the rock club as defining the sound of many rock bands. And so I was wondering how the emergence of this kind of generic kind of venue is a response to, in the end, immense diversity of music that we have and that we want to see live, but it's hard to find a specific model for each kind of music. But at the same time, of course, we should think about the diversity of these spaces where bands can perform specific types of music, because that's, I think, a very important trigger for creativity. I don't know, how do you include this this discussion about creativity in your discussion?
I think that the parts of the book that are most relevant to this is it's actually chapter 5, which talks about cultural policy, where I think it's obvious that even small changes can make a huge difference, I think, in this regard. Cultural policy can I mean, in European countries now is supporting venues without looking at the performance culture, and they could instead of supporting these organizations that are aspiring to become industry leaders, they could stimulate a development in another direction by supporting organizations with a different model that creates better conditions for experimentation, for cultural diversity, so this is possible, and I think I understand. I mean, the book focuses on analyzing the problems or the conditions, and then say, okay, these are. I identify problems. I am hesitant to develop solutions, mainly because I would like all of you to think about now. If you when you read this analysis, what conclusions would you like to draw? How does it relate to you? I mean, how would you like to take this further, if at all? Instead of, I'm cautious not to feed sort of shove something down your throat. But I think my experience is that if one understands a problem in social life, one will definitely think about solutions. The first step is to understand the problem deeply. It has changed writing this book has changed me. I mean, I've changed my understanding of the world from understanding these problems. But I would say a few things. This is definitely possible in cultural policy, and I think so. I think governments can do something, and instead of what they have generally done is to stimulate this industrial growth. And having many small organizations aspire to become part of the industry, they could stimulate other developments, and they could stimulate some of the things that Alejandro points at. I think it's possible to also for civic associations and private-public sort of collaborations to develop new concepts of performance spaces, inspired by, for instance, Eric Kleinenberg's discussion of social infrastructure. So thinking about the arts and performance as something that is integrated into neighborhood life. One thing that would be important economically would be to buy a building and give it to a non-profit, because the cost of operation, sort of the rental costs, are really draining the resources and pushing organizations to do more commercial programming and to rent their spaces to industry promoters. So a couple of things can be done. I think it would make a huge difference. And in my experience, talking to younger people who are now programmed by this industry regime, I mean, to them this is natural. Of course, we're part of the industry, and this is now the agenda. And when I talk to them and explain, well, what if we did something slightly different? And some of them have been like this big question mark. Wow, is that possible? I don't understand what you're talking about. But then you explain more, and you explain more, and then they start to say, oh, okay, you have a different idea.
Thank you. It's true that you mentioned in your book the example of the jazz club with the same band performing every night for a week or more, like different models that we tend to forget as these clubs become hegemonic. So we have other questions in the chat. Okay, so 2 questions, one from Alfredo. Capitalism and virtual spaces as institutionalized models of music, new audiences arise. What do you think? And Nicholas says, thanks for your presentation. I was wondering what you think about the concept of live music ecologies as coined by researchers from the UK or Netherlands, Adam Bear, Simon Frith, Erik Hittes, Hanno van der Hoven. What, do you think this approach can complement your perspective on institutions and performance?
Yeah, so I would like to respond to the second question first. I also think that I maybe partially answered the first question in my response to the commercialization of live streams. Yes. And YouTube. But thanks for the question. Thanks very much. And to Nicholas, I think that the conversations about ecology could benefit from a more in-depth sort of historical study of the concept's history in sociology. That's one thing. And I think for me, my main, I think I signal this in a few places in the book. I signal, I propose, well, I suggest that it would be good to distinguish between industry ecologies and neighborhood ecologies or broader social ecologies, because I think that what some scholars are doing, they talk about ecologies, but really it's an ecology of the industry, and this is not the same as a neighborhood ecology as defined by the Chicago School. And this is also what I mean about a more sort of a broader historical exploration of the concept of ecology in sociology and concepts. It's the same with the concept of community. There's a lot of discussion about participation, for instance, and about community, but the concept of community has very different meanings, and I think that these conversations would benefit from a deeper theoretical discussion of their ground in general sociology. They seem like they're adopted into this music discourse without discussing. This is a little bit the same with the concept of live music. It's okay, let's start with live music, but hey, where does the term come from? How was it created? And yeah.
Yeah, because it's something that you say, I think it's in your paper from 2010, the live music economy in the digital age. You say that the concept of live music was developed at the nexus of entertainment, media, and I don't remember the last one, but I think the city and neighborhoods is the other component in the ways that we, I mean, it's not really not the same thing working as a promoter, concert promoter, and being linked to the music industry, and to work as a venue, and to be linked to neighborhood changes and neighborhood dynamics. it's completely different. And of course, you can think about a venue as more connected to the music industry, but in the end, you're always part of a city, and that's the main difference. I mean, it's very important for, I think, for people who are not experts in live music to make the difference between what is a promoter and what is a venue, even if sometimes they can be the same person or the same platform, but in many ways they don't have the same interests, because for a venue you're definitely more vulnerable to city changes and city evolution.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, so I think the short answer is yes, there might be something to the concept of ecology, and this might be developed further. And I think that it would make sense to, well, it makes sense to scholars that are talking about it. So it probably, I mean, is meaningful. I haven't adopted it because I'm a little bit reluctant. I'm not fully convinced of how. I think it can certainly be integrated and combined with the institutional and organizational theory. And that would be a potential for, I think, for a new theoretical, or for something, for developing something conceptually, but it will require more work, and I think that it could be clearer, and it could be more, it could develop sort of with greater strength.
There is another question in the chat from Diana, who says, do you think, as we are seeing at school, that we are in front of a hybrid system for concerts and the music industry?
Sorry, can you say that again? I'm running out of fuel.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure I fully understand the question either. So do you think we are in front of a hybrid system for concerts and the music industry? I don't know.
I don't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Yes, maybe Diana, if you want to specify your question in the chat, that would help. That will help us. I don't know if anyone else here in the chat, in the room.
But meanwhile, I can say that my response, my thoughts on ecology is that I've seen it used a lot by industry lobbyists, that they talk about the ecology, and it's important to support, let's say, clubs or small festivals, because they're important to the industry. And I think that is a somewhat narrow conception of ecology. And I think that as an urban sociologist, I have other interests too.
Yes, because actually we saw in our seminar that the Music City report, the one that was like so successful to like, which was like actually a guide to how to make a city a music city. It was firstly developed by a group, an association of recorded music.
Yeah.
Which is very meaningful for us. I mean, as we want to deconstruct all this discourse on the music city. I mean, we're not saying that a music city is bad, but it's interesting to understand where it comes from and why, and etc.
Yeah.
Any other question, maybe?
What time is it in Mexico now?
It's 12:30.
Okay, it's lunchtime. That's why.
Oh no, lunch it's much later here in Mexico.
Okay.
Yeah, starting from 1 p.m. maybe. Yeah.
Okay. In Scandinavia, you can eat lunch at 11 in the morning.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that's the breakfast here. More likely.
Okay, so I have a question. In Mexico City, I think one of the problems is that the local market is saturated by foreign acts. So there are a very few local bands that get to play in and profit from this model that you've made explicit in your book. So I think right now there's this somewhat generational disenchantment, and there's this totally parallel kind of new circuit that is not in small bars, that is not in small venues, but are in parking lots, in backyards, because there are no chances for profit for local small bands. So do you think this is a foreseeable consequence and it's going to be a cycle? Or do you think this might be the beginning of another model that can be parallel to the performance institutions being, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think if one considers the 300-year history of the music field, and even you can look further back into history, all dominant models have eventually died out. So the model that dominates now with this somewhat large concert venue for rock concerts, and also other sort of related types of pop music, I mean, it will not last forever. And I think what the industry has tried to do is to exploit it as much as they can to make it last, to make it to institutionalize it as much as possible, to make it to minimize risk, to maximize profits, and knowing that in pop culture you never know how long it lasts. But it's hard. I mean, I think what you say about the situation in Mexico City, and also what Alejandro and others have said, is interesting. And I don't know enough to give well, I mean, enough to say. It was my reply to Alejandro that some parts of the field have certainly not become corporatized. But I don't know enough to. It sounds very interesting, but I don't know enough that I can. I think diagnose future developments. I would assume that other types of performance spaces. I would assume that other types of other forms of performance culture and institutions will evolve, because I think that the perfected form of the concert venue is somewhat narrow, and I think this also explains. Talk about this in the book. Explains sort of the rise of amateur performance on television and on YouTube. Then how much of that will evolve into maybe also street performances, because there are always spaces to perform. Yeah, so I think that there's probably reason to be more hopeful than I am in the book, but I think that sorry.
Yeah, I think one of the related questions to that is how much of a pattern is it? I mean, when we see the example of and I think it is related also to a question I made at the beginning related to the creative city discourse, because in the case of Montreal, for instance, the Quartier des Spectacles, which is a whole neighborhood converted in a spectacle venue. I mean, different venues. It's a very top-down initiative, but the result is, I don't know if the result is that is as clear as the one in New York, in the sense that I'm not sure that it erased all the live music culture and the live performances spaces that are in the city, but yeah, I don't know about other cities. What do you think?
Well, I'm not sure. So could you maybe summarize the question?
Yeah, I mean, how much of a pattern is it in other places in the world? The one that you describe in New York.
Well, I think that the gentrification is pretty strong in many cities. And I've done exploratory research in Chicago, for instance, where I did field work so many years ago. I did, and also on I think 15 cities around Europe. This is part of the next chapter, chapter 5. We interviewed club management in I think 13 or 15 cities around Europe. And they describe very similar trends. So, of course, it's not that all forms of performance have been reduced to this form of to something that happens in a commercial venue, but there are also other trends. There are also other developments in urban life. For instance, neighborhood bars in working class neighborhoods are gone in many cities. There are also new norms, new social norms for how sound or some call it noise is tolerated or not tolerated. There are many things sort of that follow from gentrification. I think it's a strong trend that the field of organized music performance, professional performance, pop music performance, have become more professionalized and more structured by these commercial institutions. And I think that in many cases, this is what this is not in the book, but it was a response from a person who had been working in the industry for 30, 40 years. He said, oh my God, so he read the book and he said in a coffee break, we discussed it for 8 hours actually. And in a coffee break, he said, oh my God, we just wanted it to be bigger and bigger all the time. A lot of the people that worked in the industry, it was their goal to perfect, to grow financially, because they were working in small festivals and small clubs that were not very fancy. And they thought that if they could just professionalize it and make it more organized and more bureaucratic, they would gain more respect. They would not suffer from the same financial, sort of vulnerability, all this. So it was a goal for them to say, we want to professionalize, we want to become an industry. I also remember another industry sort of professional, also one that was a higher manager of an organization. He said to me, so he had read a draft that I interviewed him for him to approve. I mean, what do you think about it? Did I quote you fairly? And he said, and then he there was one sentence where I quote him saying that the organization helped develop the local concert industry. He underlined that sentence and entered 2 exclamation marks. Yeah. So it was their dream. It was their goal. But then I think when they look at it today, also the people, also the for instance, festival owners who have sold a majority stake in the festival to a corporation, I think they have second thoughts. I can't be more specific about it because this is confidential information, but I know that some festival owners have second thoughts after experiencing how the corporate ownership has changed their daily life. So this is a history also of an industry that wanted to become a big industry, and when it did, it was not as fantastic as they expected it to be. And when I look at it in the longer history, this is not just an academic, this is a sociologist in some remote place who say, oh, this is capitalism, but they actually feel it.
Yes. Yeah, I know cases in France, I guess. Pacho, you have a question?
Hi. I don't have very good audio in my computer, so I didn't understand many words. So I'm sorry if what I say is out of place. First, I would like to ask you, you talk about 4 dimensions, and I didn't get the word for the 4th. You said symbolic, temporal, organizational, and?
Societal.
Okay. And then I think those dimensions, I'm thinking about what Michael said, are really good for the situation in Mexico City. But of course, the description of the reality would be very different than what you do in New York. And I would like to thank you for the second dimension, the temporal, because I really enjoyed that part. Well, that's also the chapter we read. I haven't read all the book, but I found it very important. And I think first that I don't think in Mexico we have, in terms of the rock music scene, neighborhood bars. I think the, let's say, rock do-it-yourself bars were more in relation with symbolic audiences or communities or people than the neighborhood, because usually they were not based in interesting neighborhoods in Mexico in terms of culture. I don't know if my colleagues will agree, but I'm thinking about Tutti Frutti or Look or Rocotitlan. They had no relation with the neighborhood, and the audiences went from many other places of the city.
So in my experience, when audiences are coming from other neighborhoods, they're still coming they're still sort of valuing the experience of experiencing a concert in that neighborhood. They want that urban experience.
Well, I think in Mexico we had in the 80s and 90s such an authoritarian government that we went to these places for the experience of the place and the music and the other audience. Yes, we didn't care the neighborhood. And we could cross the whole city, which is very big, just to get into the Tutti Frutti bar, just because it was the only punk bar in Mexico, for example. But people from around this bar didn't go there. So this description you do in your book about the CBGB is very interesting for us, but without the relation, you describe that David Byrne living close to the bar or things like that, that didn't exist. Another
okay.
Another thing I want to say, but they were powerful bars anyway. They built up the rock music scene of not only of the city but of the country. And another thing is that I think in those years we had this kind of do-it-yourself bars with an authoritarian government and with not industry. So it's different than the thing you described, because Talking Heads could become a group circulating in the big industry afterwards. Yes, but we didn't have that. And then now I think we have not the do-it-yourself bars very much, but the commercial bars, and now not corporate, but commercial bars, but different with the do-it-yourself. But then we have a new thing, which is narco traffic, and people. That means that these commercial bars are, ¿cómo se llama? Amenazados, threatened by el cobro de piso. ¿Cómo se dirá eso?
Yeah, they're threatened by the organized crime. They charge you just money for let you operate in their area.
Yeah.
And then in the end of the equation would be the corporations, like the big festival, Vive Latino, and all these things. So what I'm trying to say is that the model you describe in your fourth chapter would be very different here and with a lot of distortions if we took your book like a model, yes? But anyway, another variable, another category that I think is very powerful in Mexico is the class, the social class, because the rock music scene is very much separated in the periphery of the city or the low-class neighborhoods and so on. they are separated from the hipsters bars, let's say like that. So this class category, social class category would, I guess, today, and yes, it was also in the 80s and 90s, very important to consider, I think, because we are very segregated, authoritarian, classist country. I don't know if my colleagues would agree, but I wanted to say, and I really enjoyed your book. In fact, I did in a paper I did about also the underground scenes of the 90s. I also was thinking about this change of model from at the beginning of the 90s until the end of the 90s, with all these Mexican corporations dividing the art, visual art scene, live art scenes, music scene, and so on. And now all these scenes or cultural fields have their very big corporate or institutional festivals, you know, like the art fair, Sonamaco, or Cinema Festival of Morelia, or Vive Latino, and so on. So what I'm trying to say is that I really enjoyed your book.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I definitely agree that the cultural specificity of the institutional history in New York could have been described more, and that it would require more. I mean, I try in the next chapter to compare it a little with clubs in Europe, but even there, the comparison. It's hard to make these comparisons between I mean of cultural difference, but I agree with you. I mean, I think obviously it will be necessary to it will definitely is adequate to develop different develop different concepts, or not a different concept, but different take the concept in different directions for analyzing other cultural contexts and other cultural traditions. So that is, I think, that was always my intention. That so please take this and adapt it to, or take inspiration from it. You don't have to use it as a framework, but if it inspires you to do something else, that's also fine. But definitely, I don't think that the New York history can be used as a global model or universal model. But I hope that the language, that the theory, I mean, this is what theory can do. Theory can create a common language so that some of our concepts are the same, and that understandings of organizations and organizational structures will help us actually have this dialogue between Scandinavia and Mexico and New York, because we have some of the same concepts, and that can help us explain some of the differences that we are encountering. And I think, for this, I think that the organizational theory can maybe be a useful addition to the broader music and cultural sociology of cities.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think actually, even if the situation in Mexico is very different, I think what you did was to provide a framework. And for instance, the case of gentrification, which is very much complex, more complex, I think, in Mexico City, because there is like tendencies towards gentrification, but it's never completed really. But we can see the role of music venues. For instance, we have here in Mexico City a neighborhood called Doctores, which is right next to a neighborhood called Roma, which is very much gentrified in some way. And in this, the other neighborhood, which is not gentrified yet, there are already some venues, but they are struggling a lot. So the role that they play within the process of gentrification is very much complex. It's hard to understand if they contribute, or if they kind of offer an alternative to what is already gentrified. And it's I think what you did in New York City, even if it's very it's clear in how it shows a process of commercial institutionalization, and I don't think it's that extreme in the case of Mexico City, but still it helps us a lot to understand what's happening here, because we do have live music corporations here, and we do have DIY spaces too, and so yeah, thank you so much for your work. Thank you so much for your presentation today. I don't know if anyone else has a last question. Otherwise, we can close the session. You can also write in the chat, and we can organize maybe a dialogue by mail. Thank you so much for being here with us, Fabian, and thank you to everyone for being here today. I think that was the last session of our seminar for this semester. We will get back in September, I think, and we will let you know. You have the address of the blog, and you can subscribe to our mailing list through the blog. And yeah, I think that's it. Have a nice day, nice evening for those who are in Europe, and see you soon. Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you very much, everyone. And feel free. It was a nice, intimate meeting, informal. I really enjoyed it. And thanks for all your questions, wonderful questions and comments, and send your drafts my way. I will try as best as I can to read them and comment, and we can develop connections sort of between Scandinavia and Mexico.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gladly. Thank you
Bye.
so much, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.